Hello and welcome. My name is Attila, and I am here to give a little presentation of my elevator pitch for Neonrider. Let's get started. So here in my presentation, I've added a couple of pages for a table of contents where you can quickly access the game overview, references, gameplay, game flow, core actions, feedback list, and the backlog, as well as all the items in the backlog for flowcharts, HUD, core systems, core mechanics descriptions, level design, a mood board with development tech, and my final references page. So, Neonrider is a story. The story of Neonrider is to be a badass rider battling their way through the cyber dungeon in this epic wave-based adventure game with nothing but your blazing wheeler and a high-tech robotic cannon. Reel your way through rooms of psychedelic enemies, collect the 3 phosphorescent battle crystals, and demolish the unholy boss guard to save the day. The genre is that it is a top-down wave-based dungeon shooter. The rating is rated T for teen. Content descriptors include fantasy violence, crude humor, and some language. The platforms are intended on Apple App Store for iOS and Google Play Store for Android. The ideal audience are hyper-casual mobile players, young, fast-paced, and energetic badasses, people that like cyberpunk, speedy cars, and chicken nuggets, also completionists and achievers. As a part of the unique selling points, this is going to be an accessibility compatible mobile game. It will have a digital joystick on the HUD, but it will be compatible with a PDP Microsoft joystick or Xbox controller. Another unique selling point compared to the games and the references is that this is a dungeon adventure narrative rather than an infinite shooter like the competitors of this game would be. So from inspiration, this game comes from the core mechanic around Archero and Neon Soldier. So you are playing from a third-person camera, top-down view, and you're navigating through the dungeon by eliminating waves of enemies. You can move to dodge, and when you're at a standstill, you automatically shoot to the closest enemy to you. So part of the gameplay goals, the player will be clearing waves of enemies and earning power-ups as they level up. Each enemy has its own designated amount of experience points, which the player earns at the end of every cleared room. Also hidden in the dungeon are these crystals, these battle crystals, which the player will need to access and gain the boss key. And then in turn, the long-term goal is to kill the boss's boss guard. Yeah. The game flow starts off. As you enter a room, you will defeat enemy wave number 1. If you lose, then you enter the room again. You start from the beginning. If you win, then you go to the second wave. If you win that, you go to the third wave. And then upon completing the third wave, the room is then cleared. You collect your experience points. If you level up, you can select your special power, your booster power. And then if the room contains a crystal, you then can claim the crystal. And more or less that's the major core loop. And then you enter into the next room and you repeat the process. Upon coming into the crystal portal room, you will activate that with all the crystals that you've collected, gain the boss key, and then start to navigate yourself to the boss room. And then if you defeat the boss, that's game over. Core actions from the player is movement, using the analog or digital joystick to move the player avatar. The player can move or can shoot by maintaining an idle state, so not moving automatically shoots the cannon. You can earn XP, you can level up, you can select power-ups, you can activate the crystal room, you can also dodge by going behind level barriers. I have a 2-page starter list for feedback, which includes interface, visual effect feedback, audio feedback, and whatever that will be needed to have an optimal player experience, and give the player enough feedback and reward for them to keep engaged throughout. So this would include, crystals. When a crystal drops, there should be a visual and auditory feedback. When the player when the enemy attacks or the player attacks, there should be a sound or a visual signifier. When there's a game over, then there's a special game over sequence, so on and so forth. Here's my Q&A slide, but there is no live Q&A, so I've just left this blank. As a part of my backlog, the game theme includes a message behind Neonrider is a message of domination, persistence, and challenge. It is an experience that should instill a sense of empowerment for the player, whoever they may be. As a part of the emotional tone and the mood of Neonrider gameplay, is that it's a neon, cyberpunk, and psychedelic rush. So through each successfully cleared room of enemies, the player should feel progressively more and more powerful, while the enemy waves also become more difficult to overcome. Here's my flowchart. The player will start in the main menu, press the start button, enter gameplay, and a few things can happen from there. The player can level up, in which they'd be selecting the next power-up. They could also collect a crystal or a key for the first time, where there will be a contextual screen and a confirm collection button. Then it's also possible that the player can activate the crystal room, in which there'll be an animation sequence. Of course, the player can also lose. Well, they'll see the endgame screen and return back to the main menu, or they'll defeat the boss and get a game over screen. Here's some starting screens for the main menu and the gameplay. On the main menu, I expect to see a logo with a background and a play button, whereas in the HUD of the gameplay screen, you'll see at the top the current player level, the XP bar, a pause button, a little mini map to show little navigation signifiers of how the player, like the current room that the player is in, and the rooms that they've been before will also be shown. The character will be standing in a third-person perspective on the ground, and there'll be a shadow on the ground with a direction signifier, which is coinciding with the direction of the digital or analog joystick. Some core systems here. I'll definitely be needing a player controller for the player to use to move around. Aiming and shooting is a system that needs to be in. Enemy behavior, a leveling system, a power-up system, the boss key. Player health and damage needs to be set. Death triggers, as well as death animations and sounds. Enemy health, the enemy wave system. When a room is cleared, there are certain things that happen, like the doors open and the power-up can be selected and so on. Crystal spawning. If the room has a crystal, the crystal should spawn. And of course the player should be able to select or collect the crystal once it's dropped. Also, I need to come up with some kind of a boss behavior or a pattern of movement, combat of the boss. Game state manager, which manages all the game states, win, loss, game over, restart scenarios. And then there's obviously the map UI and the level design itself, and the game over sequence. So to go a little bit more in depth, some core mechanics. One would be the enemy wave system. So the story here is, as a player, I want to know when and how many enemies will spawn in a room in order to prepare. So some variables would be enemy waves, the amount of enemies, the enemy types, the duration between each spawn, and the spawn positions, as well as the room doors that are opening and closing. And then you have the map UI, which should signify where the enemies have been cleared. Also, the leveling and power-up system is a pretty significant core mechanic. The story here is, as a player, I want to level up and become more powerful in order to defeat enemies faster. So everything to do with the enemies, the XP amounts per enemy, the amount of XP that you need to level up should also be progressively more, require progressively more as you go forward. Then you have power-ups. What are the power-ups, right? So there's some interesting power-ups we can invent in this game. Then there's the battle crystals and the boss key mechanic, which is pretty dire here. As a player, I want to collect all the battle crystals in order to open the boss door and defeat the boss. So the crystals need a size, they need a color, they need a spawn duration, spawn location, animations, trigger, sound. You have an inventory system. The player needs to be able to collect these crystals, return the crystals to the crystal room, and then also activate and spawn the boss key once it's dropped. And then, yeah, there also needs to be a collection trigger hitbox, perhaps, with a diameter and a behavior attached to it. So some of the, I've gotten deep into the some characters in the game. The player avatar, or the player character, is called Luke Dukem, and he's our able protagonist who rolls around with a battle chair, and he has a few states. He's idle, and he's automatically shooting, and then movement, rolling around animation, cannon is then deactivated. The player has health. There's a hitbox collider. Example of some enemies, we have enemy type number 1 is Robot Chicken, which is a tiny yet tempered robot chicken, flaps his wings at standstill, and then idles for 3 seconds, jump attack in a random direction, has 50 HP, also has a death animation sound and a spawn position visual effect. Same with enemy number 2, which is Robo, called Robo. He's a clumsy robot gyro with a deadly laser. And he'll be idling for 5 seconds, aiming with a laser as the player is going, and then he'll have a firing animation at that point where the laser turns off, or where the position of the player was at that point, and then move in a random direction for 3 seconds and then repeat that. So he'll have 110 HP, a death animation and sound as well. Syndicate is enemy number 3, a sneaky android demolitionist. He'll be targeting the player for 2 seconds, throwing the projectile at that player position at the end of that 2 seconds, and then he'll release a smoke bomb, vanish, and respawn in another location on in the room, and then repeat that behavior over until the player clears the room. And the health of Syndicate is 220 HP, has a death animation and sound. Zeus X is the boss with 6,666 HP. His behavior is twofold. He'll have a movement and attack, so he'll be strafing left and right towards the 2 walls of the room, shooting his dual cannons. There'll be a rate of fire. When he charges, he'll have a charge attack, so there'll be an anticipation animation, charge forward towards the player, retreat back to the idle position, and then there's a death animation and sound. This is the level design for the dungeon map. Between each of the rooms, each gray square is a room, so in between each of the rooms is a door, and there's 3 different types of doors. There's the normal doors that open once you complete or clear the room of the enemy waves, and then there is 2 special doors, one to open the door for the boss key room, and that requires the 3 battle crystals to be returned to the room. And then there's the boss key, or the boss door room, or the boss room door, the boss room door, and it will require a boss key to open it. So if you take one of these rooms and enlarge it, this would be an example of a level design. The light gray tiles would be the ground tiles. The little bit darker would be wall tiles, so there can be some obstacles in the level. And then there's holes, so the darker gray, much darker gray can be holes where the player cannot step over, they have to go around. And also water acts the same way. The green square is where the player can enter the room, where the doorways are illustrated on each of the 4 edges of the room. And then there will be a position where a crystal could spawn if there is a crystal in the room. This is the mood board for Neonrider. A lot of cyberpunk theme, a lot of robots and neon mood associated with the game and the vision of the game. I plan to use Unity for development, Blender for any 3D assets, and Audacity for audio. Finally, these are the references for my presentation. And thank you so much for your time. I'm very excited about the elevator pitch to move forward, and let's connect on LinkedIn